Hey aspirants, welcome to Insights I Can Initiative. We'll begin the first topic of the day with a topic that is relevant to GS Paper 1 called uh, Population and Issues Related to Population. So, if you see here, this is a topic related to the silver surge, or indirect way talking about the rising population of senior citizens in the country, or we can also say rising population those who are above 60 years of age, or we can say the dependent population. So this article is about, is India prepared to see a surge in the number of population rising in this age group? So we have to talk about the concept of demographic dividend here before we try to understand what is the issue of silver surge, and is India ready for this particular phenomenon. We usually talk about demographic dividend. That is, India is currently in a demographic window where there is a huge number of younger population which are capable of boosting the country's GDP. At the same time, we are missing out on a point that this entire younger generation is going to get aged at the same time. In addition to this, we are seeing fall in the rate of fertility and other challenges. So we might in the future face challenges like how Japan, South Korea and Italy are facing with respect to lesser rate of birth and booming old age population. So the question that the author put to us in this particular article was, are we ready to take the increased number of senior citizens in the country? May not be currently, but in the future. So we were provided with certain important statistics related to aging population. We'll quickly have a look at them. So this included the statistics include by 2050 it is told that 1/5 of Indian population will be 60 years and above. So these statistics, keep them ready when you get any question related to demography or changing issues in India's demography. So the second important statistics according to the article was women and men in India report. So women and men in India report in 2023 talk about two major factors which lead to increase in senior population in India. One of them is falling fertility rate. So declining fertility rate, plus we have higher expectation in the life, that is life expectancy is higher. Many people are living beyond 80 years or above. So because of these two reasons, we see that there is a surge in senior citizen population. So this effectively changes the fabric of our economy and society in many ways. So what are the ways in which this impacts our economy and society? If we look into this topic, we get the idea that both in economic and social sense, there is a huge strain on social security system. If you see, social security refers to post retirement concepts. So this system in India currently is not sufficient to hold the huge population which may turn up to senior citizen growth. The second aspect is, it would add a greater pressure on future children, or let's say the future working population, who will be less in number but have to handle the dependent population in a larger number. So this would definitely put a impact on productivity of them at their workplaces, because when work productivity would be better when there are large people working in the same age group, but because of lesser people in the young group, more dependency population, the productivity will come down. So the economic productivity will definitely be taking a toll. So here we come to a question, that is, how quickly can we adapt to turn this impending wave into a tide of opportunity? So this term would be very relevant to use. It is a wave when it becomes dangerous, but we can usually make it a tide of opportunity. So the author discusses a few ways of turning this huge changes in the demography into opportunities. So that is, first one is forward thinking policy. So in this, there is a need to initiate right forward thinking policy about having some potential challenges into opportunities. For example, what government recently did was to increase the age of Ayushman Bharat beneficiaries to 70 years and above. So when this step is taken, it is kind of setting a stage for giving equal benefit to senior citizens, not only in the health segment but also in social and economic parameters, and also by giving security to them in the form of an aging nation. So the second action plan is in the National Action Plan for Senior Citizens. It was the latest one, had come in 2019. So this action plan should go beyond just financial security. So if it is just financial security and social security benefits, it may not give a right approach. We are talking about the fundamental rights here, or human rights to be specific. So when we make it beyond a concept of financial security, we would also talk about inclusivity, taking senior citizens into all aspects of decision making, giving them equal rights just because they are Indian citizens, and age without being a determining factor here. So policy should include all these aspects as well. So the third or the major part of this article's discussion was silver economy being used as a silver bullet. That is, as of now in the whole world, the silver economy, or those who are in the senior population, they have a, the silver economy is worth $7 billion, but there is an expectation that by the time we go to 2028, this economy would surge to $48 billion. So it's a huge economic opportunity for any country. But how do we use this? The idea is to create new market for, we are creating new markets around the senior care. Let's say in providing assistive technologies, any aids that we can talk about, we can give them age friendly services. So these services would act into something that we call as senior citizen or silver economy. So it would be possible only when elderly are considered as participants in the economy without spending power, or which with spending power which boosts the silver industry. This would be possible when we see that senior citizens are not just relying or dependent population, but they create ample opportunities to make sure that the economy surrounds around them. So this is something, a very fresh perspective on the topic we can tell. The next one is kind of a collaborative approach, where government alone would not be able to perform all these functions. They need the help of corporates, they need the help of philanthropists as well, plus the CSR fundings also can be roped in. So they have lot of advantages over just the government, because they get access to global healthcare practices, how it is done. They have good access to research and development. They have had experiences in the same field catering to the needs, plus it leads to a lot of job creation as well. So there is an example given in the article which is must to be quoted in any of your questions that come related to senior citizen care. So as we know, Japan, Singapore and the countries like this are facing the problem of huge old population. They have something called community led model. So this is a kind of case study that we can use as well. So Japan's model is called community based integrated care system. CBIS system belongs to Japan, whereas Singapore calls it aging in place. So what is it about? It is something that is focusing on quick service delivery to the people. Let's say they have kept a target of 30 minutes. Any kind of benefits, that any kind of assistance that senior citizens need, it may be in the form of medication, it may be in the form of physical help to perform their daily activities, it may be in the form of taking care of loneliness that they are often facing. For all this, service delivery will be done within 30 minutes using the locally available population. So if we can do this in a nation like Japan and Singapore, in India, we have similar aspects or similar counterpart to the service provided in the form of ASHA workers. So ASHA workers was also a similar concept, where we rope in the local population to cater to the needs of local or village areas. So in a similar pattern, we can employ the urban local youth to provide the services that CBICS in Japan is doing. So this plan of silver economy would be very relevant when you get questions related to population challenges or how can India use its demography dividend. So demographic dividend, remember, is not only about utilizing the younger population. We should always mention in our answer that our plan to utilize demographic dividend should go along with the idea of how are we going to use a population that is getting old very soon, right? So this would give a kind of a proactive perspective in your answer writing. So it is like making the whole concept of our demography more resilient and inclusive from the next coming policy onwards. So the next topic we'll be doing is right versus reality. And in this question, we always leave out the idea of dignity. This is because I think in one of our past videos, we have already discussed a topic related to disability. But this article gave a fresh perspective or some important valid arguments. And I felt this would be very useful if you get any question related to justice in paper 2 or paper 4 justice in justice concept as well. Plus, if we get any essay related to equitable distribution of resources and all of them, we would be able to utilize this point in those questions as well. So there was a very beautiful statement told at the beginning of this article. I felt that you can quote it as it is to and use it in your answer based on the context of the question. I would read it out. Please note it down. Okay, it goes in this way. Finding a truly accessible public space feels like spotting a unicorn, rare and magical. So here the author compares the idea of an accessible public place where a person with disability, people who cannot walk on their own, those who are not blind, those who are not having a proper vision or any other disability, the public places today are not accessible. Despite making a law to make the public places accessible, have a campaign called Accessibility India campaign. Despite this, to find the accessible place is so rare that it feels as if you're finding an animal called unicorn, which in reality is not existing but is a mythological character. So this comparison of unicorn, spotting a unicorn, use this in your answers where you want to, in a kind of satirical manner, talk about the efforts that are not seen at the ground level. So use this phrase in your essays to make it a beautiful way of writing in a satirical way. So why are we discussing this topic? Because in one of the recent judgments, Supreme Court has told that accessibility, that is ability to utilize resources in an equitable manner, accessibility for a person with disability, it is not just a fundamental right, it is a human right as well. Many a times before this we had the notion, right, being accessible or we can say environment being accessible was a legal right, but it later became a fundamental right by intervention of the courts, and now it is also a human right. So when these three rights are there, are these rights turning into reality, was the question the author asked. And when we want to turn these rights into reality, why is it not happening? Because we are not giving proper dignity to the people who are suffering from various disabilities. So we'll first check some ideas of how being inaccessible is a bane, or why being inaccessible leads to many challenges to the administration. The first one is, if a particular public space is inaccessible, it leads to the lot of inconvenience to the person who is suffering from the illness. So it is because of the systemic inequalities. The system itself doesn't feel that we need to make or accommodate the spaces so easily. So when we do this, it is nothing but it is resulting in denial of dignity to the people who are disabled. At the same time, we are also denying them the freedom that the other citizens enjoy because of their proper physical capabilities. So as we make the places inaccessible, it also results in excluding the persons from many public services. Like now government provide free buses to women in many states like Delhi and Karnataka, but if a woman is disabled, don't we think that these public space services are provided, but just because they are disabled, they are excluded from taking benefits of these services. And at the end of the day, irrespective of which class or category they belong to, persons with disability will face marginalization. So, this could be a proper pictographic way of representing why inaccessibility leads to multiple complications, and this is a policy check that we need to do when we are making any operations or any plan in the country. So, here, what will happen if we make things accessible to the persons with disability? So it will be nothing but it will be something that we call inclusive development. They are also considered an important part here. This would lead to transformative governance. Transformative governance, meaning those who are not included till now, this leads to transformation in the way the government would be treating them. This would be followed by any kind of rights that they are given, any kind of obligations that they are meant to do. The persons with disabilities can do all of them, that too with an added quotient of dignity, without having to rely on others for help. So this entire feature was explained by the author using a case study that they conducted in Bangalore. Okay, do note them to point out some statistics related to health. So what they have done in Bangalore, they have just checked about public toilets that are available. So they have tested some 65 public toilets in the vicinity of Bangalore and found out that public toilets have completely ignored the idea of being accessible. They have not bothered to give accessibility there. And out of this, some 14 toilets did have persons with disability friendly infrastructure. They had ramp to take wheelchair. They did have some separate toilet rooms for persons with disability. But the apathy here was the ramp was either too steep to move or too narrow to take the wheelchairs. And here the separate toilets were closed down. We can say they were locked, or they were used as storerooms in many cases. If not that, these rooms were also inaccessible in the way that the doors were too narrow for wheelchair to move in. So though the idea is there, it is done just for the purpose of keeping the provision, but not with the intention of making it easier for the persons with disabilities. So here the author tells that, or concludes by telling that, we have Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, in which accessibility is made a legal obligation, or it is compulsory to make the public spaces accessible. But it is, though it is in a law like this, somewhere the society still perceive that it is a special requirement that we are providing to the public. Okay, it's a special requirement, and because of this feature, it is seen as an add-on to the original infrastructure we are planning, which needs to be adjusted somewhere in the original plan. So instead of this, the author tells that, how about plan itself will have a provision for citizens who are personally disabled or who are physically challenged. So, the concluding statement was very interesting. It told that it's not about building more, but ensuring that what is built truly serves everyone around. So, this article would be very relevant to you to also quote in something called empathy in your GS paper 4 answer. If a lawmaker or if a bureaucrat is empathetic enough, these are some things they would definitely make sure when they are making policies. So responsive administration in GS paper 2, in all those cases, please give this angle to your answer making as well. Right, so we'll go to the next topic of the day. It is about man versus wild, or can it also be man and wild? That is, the wild population and men or humans, can they coexist with each other? So this was an article or a kind of survey that was published in Indian Express, where we see that in the case of Gujarat, okay, and I think we have in one of our studies, previous ICANN videos, discussed about the Maldhari community in bunny grasslands of Gujarat, who have from quite long time coexisted with the lion population, the only place in the whole world where till now there is Asiatic lions presence. So, a study published in Conservation Biology, based on the data collected between 2012 and 17, speaks about how Asiatic lions are coexisting with humans in Gujarat. So, basically, they have discussed about something called as the Gujarat model here, but this is not the economic model but the environmental model we are talking about. So, the first advantage of why humans are allowing or okay with lions present around them is because of the economic value that these lions provide in the form of wildlife tourism. The Gir National Park and the other safaris earn a lot of money to the local population, which is helping them to keep the population of lions intact. So the second one is kind of a cultural aspect where the idea of pride is associated. Local people believe that having a charismatic animal like lion gives them a lot of pride in the local area. So this also has helped them to conserve the lion population. Additionally, the lions are revered here, or we can tell they are worshipped here, because of which the lions are not harmed. So the cultural practice also goes a long way with it. What is that cultural practice? The cultural practice is about people abandon old cattle. Okay, these old cattle are left out of the home, which is one of the important prey base for these lions and form a major part of their diet to keep them healthy. So the fifth one is the role of government is very relevant here. In case the lion attacks some cattle species in the area, the farmers get immediate compensation. So they won't be worried that a cattle is lost or economic life is impacted by the destruction of cattle or livestock population, but they feel that cattle is being fed by the lion, which is a religious or a sentiment for them, and no economic loss also because government compensates them immediately. So with this, the author would this research paper tells that it is one of the greatest success stories in the real life. So as a result, what has happened is the geographic range of lions have increased by 36% in the recent past, and there is an annual growth rate of lions at the rate of 6% per annum. So this is a statistics that you can mention to tell how coexistence of certain tribal population and the wildlife is definitely possible, right? So they have also given certain suggestions for the Indian government to make this work even more better, and this would also be taken in your answers for man animal conflict. So they tell that revise the livestock compensation. So this livestock compensation amount need not be something that was fixed many decades ago. Very frequently, this has to be changed to keep the farmers or the people motivated. Second is they have given a proposal of having something called livestock insurance, so that insured livestock will be a better and lesser responsibility on the government as well. The third is introduce the concept of radio collar and geofencing. So this is nothing but to alert the people whenever the lion is approaching an area nearby them. So this suggestions were given in the magazine or in the conservation paper. So remember them to use them in your man animal conflict related article. So the next topic we'll be doing is very relevant and apt and topic for GS paper 4, where we have a categorization of topics in the form of virtues and vices. So virtues are anything that increase the value of a human being, whereas vices demean the qualities of a good human. So here we'll basically talk about the concept of hatred or hate, which is a vice. So if you have seen in GS paper 4, they have asked questions related to vices as well. In the recent past, there was a question related to anger, and now there was article in Indian Express related to how a village in Vietnam called My Lai Okay, this village in My Lai was a victim of US military attack during the US Vietnam War. And in this village called My Lai, there were some 500 people who were killed in a very notorious manner by the American soldiers. So this scene of tragedy is there right in the memory of those children who had witnessed this and survived the whole ordeal. But today, the natural tendency for these children would be that it would have filled their minds with hatred against the US and its soldiers, and this hatred would have consequences in many negative ways. But this village is trying to give a new message to the world by the unique way in which they're trying to keep the memory of Vietnam and US war alive. So if you see, no use of hatred, okay, this was a phrase told by the person in this village. So a Vietnamese village seeks to move on from a US massacre. So here the author, the when the author went into talking about too many people in this village who were young children when this massacre took place, they have a very unique opinion telling that in our village we treat this idea of hate, or this whole concept of not liking somebody, as a virus. So what we do when somebody is attacked with a virus, we usually use some medicines to suppress it. At the same time, we make sure that the other person that doesn't get infected with this virus, right? So in the same way, the village tells that hate is a virus. We always try to suppress this and make sure it is powerless by making sure it doesn't infect others or doesn't grow in nature. So this idea was really beautiful, where hate is having a lot of negative connotations and negative ideas, not only for an individual but society as a whole. So here in Vietnam there are many museums which have kept the memories of this war alive, but we would be surprised to see that most of the museums speak the positives of this war, not as in what positive the war in itself has led. It is about many American soldiers who came ahead and stopped these kind of massacres from happening. There is an example of when a contingent of soldiers came down from helicopter to stop a particular village from burning. There is an example of a US soldier who shoots himself on the leg to make sure he doesn't take part personally in all these violences. Though some other humanly behaved soldiers have been commemorated and celebrated in this whole museum. So the people in this village feel that American soldiers have killed Vietnamese people as a display of frustration due to loss of their own colleagues in the war. So they are trying to give this a humane nature altogether. So this brings us to a question: what is the use of hatred, or what do we get out of hatred? Hatred breeds the concept of revenge, and revenge comes to the idea of making the other person also blind, which ultimately concludes to the concept of eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. So we'll very quickly have a topic on how hatred and why hatred is a vice altogether. So if you see, hatred leads to a concept called social fragmentation. So in case of Vietnam, the whole Vietnamese community, if they hated the US, it would lead to two different blocks in the world, which would result in divisions in the society. That some people who hate and some people who don't hate, they would become two groups, and in the end would lead to communal or social clashes. In India's perspective, it would be given a caste dimension as well. The second negatives of hatred is it leads to ethical erosion. So what do we mean by this? It turns into a dehumanization of others, or let's say undermining moral values. So any moral value you tell, hate tries to dominate that value. And the third important concept here is how will it impact governance, or let's say how government would use it, or let's say many of the political parties try to use this hatred as a political tool to deepen the same hatred and take political or vote bank advantage out of it, making the concept even worse. right? So if we see the other analyzed parts of hatred, we can quote Buddha in this. Okay, what Buddhism tells about hatred, it's a very beautiful idea where uh, hatred is treated as a poison. Okay, poison that obstructs enlightenment. When you have hatred, you cannot have many important realizations in life. That is the meaning of this. So it is basically rooted in a concept called ignorance. It will not allow you to see the whole world in a clear way. So another important person who has told something about hatred is Aristotle. He tells that hatred can corrupt the soul of an individual, thus blocking rationality. So, if you are having hatred filled in your heart and your mind, you cannot think clearly, or it blurs one's vision. So, what would happen if hatred exists? That is, we'll see how hatred changes the behavior of an individual, and this is of utmost importance. So, what happens? Hatred gets manifested in the form of aggression or anger, correct? So, it would lead to violence. It would lead to concepts like social exclusion, telling that I hate you, you cannot be in this vicinity. So these behavior perpetuate cycles of conflict and retaliation with the community or the person to whom the hatred is shown. So with this, we can tell that hatred basically is a social phenomena, or we can tell hatred is also a having a social connotation, where we say that it is often learned through family. Many a times this happens, the way we a family hates a particular idea or a group or a kind of person, this gets ingrained into the younger children. So family and culture, if they hate something, it goes on as a propaganda, or it just gets exploited for political gains, and this hatred goes on for generations together without knowing the reason for it. So at the end of the day, hatred is resulting only in making the worst decisions. And I think we are not already wary of the idea of how hatred impacts a person's mental strength as well. So we'll just try to address this question in the next class. You also try to answer it. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So if you get a question in this format in paper 4 telling what does this quote mean to you in the present context, whatever we discussed it till now would rightly apply. So in such questions, try to give the example of this Vietnamese village, which would make it very apt. So the last topic for today would be about a person whose quote is quite popular to UPSC aspirants, I'm sure. And the person who used this title called India is the Cradle of Civilization. You guessed it right. It is none other than Mark Twain, whose birthday is being celebrated world over, who is a very popular humorist and an author from United States. So many of his ideas are useful for us in our essays and also in paper 2 and paper 4. Let's quickly have a brief look on the contribution of this author in giving a very great identity to India at a time when the Eastern culture was constantly degraded by the colonial masters. So, if you see, this quote of Mark Twain would be very popular to you, that India is a cradle of human race, birthplace of human speech, mother of history, grandmother of legend, great grandmother of tradition, and most valuable and most instructive material in the history of men are treasured up in India only. So, this is quite popular and well known idea, but we'll look towards a very important travelogue or a book written by Mark Twain in which he has made this quote. So, this book is named Following the Equator. So, in this book, it is about the long journeys he has made throughout the world. But this is not just a travelogue, it throws reflections on human nature, morality, colonialism, cultural diversity. So, we'll quickly have a brief look on all of them and how it would be relevant in our answers. So, the first one is about human nature. So, Mark Twain in his book tells that there are some features which are common to human beings to all, compared to all the places he has traveled. That is, let's say, the ideal of curiosity. wherever he landed up, people were having a common perception, that is common quality, which was curiosity. They all had something in common called as suffering, irrespective of the class to which they belong to, irrespective of the caste in India's case they belong to, irrespective of the gender they belong to. They all were having a common idea called suffering in one way or the other. But at the same time, they also had the courage, or let's say resilience, to fight back the suffering and stay grounded to face the realities of the life. So he challenges the idea that moral superiority of the western countries is more than the eastern country, because he felt that at the end of the day human nature is same throughout the world. So this perception would be relevant to us in many essays where the various distinctions we have done among human beings as a human creation, at the end nature has created and made us equal when it comes to all these features, right? So the second one he talks about is cultural revivalism. Cultural revivalism, or we can better put it as cultural relativism. Okay, cultural relativism is that Mark Twain in his book has told about the idea that no single culture holds a monopoly on truth or morality. If you see, truth and morality is not so objective, like we tell that truth is having only one idea. Wherever you go, truth will not change. But at the same time, we have many traditional philosophies in India telling that truth has various perceptions. You know the story of an elephant and a blind man, blind people. So the way they touch the tail of an elephant and tell that elephant is lean, some other person tells touch the trunk and tells elephant is very soft in nature. So the truth is perceived in different ways by different people. So the idea that truth is a dominant factor coming from only one part of the world is a fake perception. So cultural relativism could be a very good idea to quote in your answer. Okay, the third concept he told was about interplay between progress and exploitation. So he used to travel the world at a time when many colonial countries used to keep colonies with their colonies in the form of India, South Africa, and other countries. So he questioned that what is the purpose of progress when you are achieving this progress by exploiting and violating the people in the other parts of the world. He tells that the meaning of progress is only misconceived by these people who don't understand that progress means holistic growth of a society. That is, the progress should benefit all the members of the society. So this idea was very well told by Mark Twain once he visited different parts of the world and realized that the progress that the colonial masters talk about is definitely not the progress that is actual in its sense. So the last one, but a very important concept that he discusses, is about spirituality. Okay, spirituality. And he was the most inspired by Indian philosophies. So there are many philosophical schools in India that he studied and went back and tells that the Eastern spirituality, or the Indian philosophers and the spirituality that India teaches, it is far more superior than the Western spirituality. He tells that Indian philosophies mainly talk about introspection, they talk about introspection, they talk about the concept of detachment, and these two have a long way in finding answers to one's life. So he tells that these two concepts, they contrast the Western philosophy of materialism, where we tell that the more you earn, the more happier you'll be. So Western materialism is contrasting with the Eastern spiritualism. He suggests that Eastern spiritualism offers profound insights into the purpose of life and human contentment or human satisfaction. So, this is a very good topic of discussion. And the last part, or this was a quote used by him in the same book. So, I felt that it's very well to be used. How can we use it? We'll tell you. So far, I am able to judge nothing has been left undone, either by man or by nature, to make India the most extraordinary country that the sun visits on his rounds. Nothing seems to have been forgotten, nothing overlooked. So it is telling about the greatness or superiority of Indian civilization. And this would, a US author telling this about India, it is nothing but India's soft power. So when we want to use India's soft power to make sure the world affairs is not harming India to a great extent, this philosophical dimension of Mark Twain can be aptly fitting in your GS paper 2 international relations answers, and also your paper essay paper as well. So with this, we'll end today's discussion. Thank you so much for the patience. Stay tuned for the next episode.